Right, theoretically streaming. Wait, waiting. What? Should be live. Okay, yeah. Mute myself. Edit video. Uh, mm, monetization on, please. And control. Live chat. And now we wait. Get have that up. And was there anything else? Don't think so. All right. One or two or dash. I don't know. Apparently, let's get my eternal nemesis up. And I'll pull up prices when we get to them. All right, let me run through my note sheets. Just make sure I have everything I want. Pretty sure that should be it. At least I couldn't really think of anything else. Probably should have written these in order though. All right, so I'm gonna have to be jumping from one page to another when the time comes. Starting about 10 minutes or so, like usual, since there seems to actually usually be a 10-minute delay between when I start streaming and when people actually see the thing pop up, or at least for most people. Who all's here now? Two or three, supposedly. See if Josh got back. Not yet. You guys, let me know at any point if I'm missing anybody. This is the interactive viewer map where I've mapped out where everyone who actually like speaks and and interacts with either me or other people on like a reasonably frequent basis is from. So not literally everyone who's ever just made a single comment ever at one point, but this is everyone I'm aware of for the moment. For where was I gonna put? I didn't click on that. Get off. All right. I have no idea where I'm gonna start things when we actually do start. Maybe I will go ahead and pull up prices. I don't have those open. Yeah, I won't open those yet. You there yet, Josh? Apparently not. And then also, while we're waiting for people to arrive, I completed the Patreon map. So this is everybody who is a contributor on my Patreon with the different monthly donation levels being different degrees of oil exporter. So mild oil exporter, then decent oil exporter, and then the top class for $10 plus people is a Persian Gulf producer. And Alejandro returned as a $10 patron after some months of being away, and he's the only one, so he automatically gets classified as Saudi Arabia unless he gets dethroned at any point. But in the odd event that every slot actually gets filled, then I'll probably switch over to also including like major gas exporters as like an additional category. So there's that. And then, like I said, that's the active slash interactive viewer map. So if anybody from anywhere else that's at least an active person around here usually sees that their country is missing, by all means, let me know who's here. That would depend on what, like the production chain for what specifically. And in the case of critical things, it already is preemptively adjusting and has been doing so. As about 10 years ago, it was around 90% of all computer processors were made in Taiwan. That has substantially dropped since then to around 60 or 65%, with production expansions in South Korea and Japan, Malaysia, the US, Germany, and some is going to start up in Turkey soon, but that's not actually a good thing because Turkey's going down their whole Ottoman restoration nonsense. Germany is going to be expanding production capacity for those. The US is expanding some more, and Malaysia and South Korea are both expanding more as well. And most of those would come online around like 2025 or 2026 and would then drop the Taiwan share of processor production worldwide down to like between 30 and 40%. So it would be better for everyone worldwide if China waited just a little bit. And I mean, they are going to wait at least a tiny bit. Like like I've said before, really reasonably certain they're not going to go for it this year. They will probably do another fake out, like practice force assembly on the coast, like they did last year around September. Uh, this year, I like last year, I phrased it as 5% chance. This year, higher, but still unlikely, like maybe 20% chance they would do it this year. Next year, 2024 is the first year that it tips over into 50+% chance of them going for it because they want at minimum they want to have their expanded amphibious assault vessel fleet actually like complete before they go for it. It's still going to fail and they're still going to faceplant themselves and cause a internal rumbling of sorts, but you know, once someone makes up their mind they're going to do something stupid, you can't really stop them. Uh, low to mid value. I mean, if you mean like what China really actually makes the most of, which is cheap plastic nonsense and knickknacks that you find at the exit aisle in every store, like bouncy balls, stuffed toys, uh, fidget spinners, what have you, then yeah, there's likely going to be an immediate supply shock of that. Like after within a few weeks to a few months after it starts, whenever they go for it, you will very rapidly see like the toy aisles in any and every store virtually empty. However, the inherent the inherent quality of that stuff being cheap plastic nonsense is kind of should kind of give you an intuitive answer. It can be replaced by anybody. It would just take a little bit to make to make some new molds. The molding machines that they inject the plastic into at factories elsewhere to start like making stuff like that. Like I think one of the other what's one of the other things they do? A lot of motors for cheap things, usually toys and standalone fans, like a fan that you put on like your desk or something. And it slipped my mind. Was it electric razors and electric toothbrushes? Those are a lot of those are made in China, except one brand. I think Philips. I think Philips is made in the U.S. And well, actually, also most regular non-electric razors that you would shave with like shaving cream and stuff are also made in China. But you'll live basically is all I can say about that. A lot of the stuff that is still hyper dependent on China is is like stuff that's kind of easy to relocate. The difficult stuff that was like that had to do with like a lot of electronics, like the iPhones. If you're someone who insists on paying $1,400 for something you could easily just pay $60 for, that stuff was clinging on to China for a while, but Apple has finally actually grown a brain and has started switching that over to India. Like I think they're up to 50% in India now. But basically, a lot of companies that made important things, well, mostly in China, got the memo either on their own or they were probably backdoor informed by by like U.S. government liaisons that the you it would be in your better interest to get out because we all know this is coming. 6 or 7. No Josh, apparently, or at least not yet. He said he was going to the store, so he might be a while. I don't want to keep you guys waiting, and I also don't want to make people who are probably going to be showing up in the next 10 minutes or so miss like mega important stuff. So uh let me flip through here. I'll find some like lesser degree of importance things that we can go through first. All right. Of course, the issue is whichever stuff related to whichever country I uh, go into after saying the term lesser stuff, I'm just going to get me in trouble with people from whichever country I happen to bat down on. Okay, there. Not saying they're unimportant, but in terms of the like effect they'll have on things, not too important. We'll start with something revolving around Cuba, because I doubt I have that many Cuban viewers who will get pissed off at me. So Cuba is right on the verge of beginning their population contraction. It actually stands a fair chance of being closer to a collapse. Where's the? Oh yeah, I have to scroll up. So let's get Cuba up. And many countries are on the verge of this, actually, some worse than others. But Cuba is, they still haven't actually posted the end of 2022 numbers. When you see these on any sites like this, don't just ignore the gray bars, because all those do is take the change between the last two and then project it out on an algorithm. They have nothing to do with actual data. So in 2022, Cuba dropped from 11.35 back down to 11.29. This resurgence here, that's they went up like this in those particular 2 years. That was from a lot of Cubans who were working abroad returning because of a lot of stuff being shut down during COVID. So everything around the end of 2021 and over the course of last year started, getting back in business. So they dropped back down to 11.29 again as everyone started going back out to work in other countries. So they've plateaued around 11.2 or so for a while. Not that their death rate was like outpacing their birth rate or anything, but primarily they were getting close, like really narrow, and then narrow enough to where, constant emigration out of Cuba, people trying to get out, eventually tipped it over. Whereas the pyramids, Cuba, there we go. What the? Oh, yeah, sorry. That one off. What the? Get out. Get out. This one. Okay, here we go. So this is from the start of 2020, and their death age starts right up around 72 or 73, although they'll list it otherwise. But you can always tell if you look at an ascension like this and then look and find the point where instead of being sort of vertical-ish, it then kind of abruptly turns into an upward incurve. So right around there, except this was 3 years ago. So we go down 1, 2, 3 to this one, and I get that off. And then you can trace that down there to see where it would be compared to the youngest generations being born. And then we go a few years out, or 7 years left in this decade. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And then you would trace that down and find it decently overshooting the number of new children being born, which is in itself contracting. So it would already be overshooting this this number as it is. However, this is going to be smaller at that time, and so you have this big wing of a much larger earlier generation that's heading towards. And again, this is from 3 years ago, so it's heading towards dying off, and that is decently larger than the youngest generation down here, or youngest year bracket, and much larger than the youngest year bracket that's going to be in place, 5, 7 years from now as we get towards especially the end of the decade. So Cuba, like several others that we'll be going over, is about to tip into a population decline that will, for a short period of time, get really steep and then slow down as once they get past this big wing. So that is going to start over the course of this decade. It's not something that's going to happen all within this decade and then be complete within this decade, but this is going, their tip over is going to start. and things might get their numbers might draw down even faster. Things might get exacerbated by the continuing deterioration of conditions within the country that have been causing unrest over the last year or two that you may have seen in the news off and on, that has been causing waves of people to flee across the to flee over to Mexico, and some of them then try to get into the U.S. But despite what more right-leaning media in the U.S. Tries to sell, most of them actually do stay in Mexico because they're not they don't like the they're not like setting out with this literal like political goal of coming to America. Their goal is just get out of Cuba, like many other goals in other places, like get out of Afghanistan or get out of Syria, or now most recently, I just want to get out of Sudan. And now, actually, you may have seen how quickly things went down overnight. Now the new wave is going to be getting out of Pakistan, because Pakistan is descending into chaos very rapidly over just the last several hours after their military governments arrested and uh, beat the crap out of their former prime minister, basically giving away the fact that they have no intention of giving over control back to like democratically elected government. So, establishing themselves as a military junta now, without actually saying it directly, but the actions kind of speak for themselves. So now Pakistan is descending into chaos, and that has literally happened just over the last 24 hours. But, anyways, yeah, so Cuba is about to tip into a population decline this decade that will quickly get very steep. And then Scotland, well, I colored in the entire UK on that viewer map. So technically you were already there. Why do you not open to the one that I actually click on? But again, if anybody else if anybody else's country is missing, then speak up by all means. But yeah, I got everyone I'm aware of so far, at least who is an actively speaking viewer, with Sweden being the most recent addition. Okay, 12. All right, I'm gonna roughly consider that enough to start with like heavier stuff, and we'll give people just another minute by padding out the runtime with the one good thing that I have on the list. Now there are other things I could have put, but that's generally not what goes on here. So I put the one good thing, or at least the one thing that I find optimistic and exciting. And no, not the mythological figure. There we go. And that is one decent thing that will be happening this decade is finally the lunar return. Next up, in 20, either late next year or in 2025, we will be sending humans back to just orbit around the moon a bit for a little while, and then come back for the first time in over half a century. And then in 2027, I think, is the actual return. I don't know why they decided to do the depiction like this. That is not remotely what the thing's going to look like. But oh, at least yeah, there's a launch photo. This was from the launch where it went by itself, automated, just to make sure that it all worked. Look at that magnificence. Really, really would like to actually be present for a launch of something. I almost got to twice in my life, but both times that I was at Cape Canaveral, the launch ended up getting canceled and postponed by a week because of weather. So I got denied both times. But yeah, the lunar return is something that's also happening this decade. And like I said, that is the only bright, optimistic, good thing that I have on the list of stuff. Everything else is not so much. Well, actually, some things are, but most of them not really. So, all right, where do we start? Now that we're actually doing stuff, uh, not there, here. Guess might as well start with oil. So, global oil production. Uh, don't want to go to the. Well, that's the only option I really have, but ERCE. Go to supply. Get away from the average. Okay, so this is global oil supply. There was the brief plateau of the first oil peak back around '08, and there's the big COVID price collapse drop, and we have now returned to the prior pre-COVID levels. And global oil production over, excuse me, over the course of this decade will continue increasing a bit. Not that much higher though, but it definitely should get up to or a bit above 105 at least. And the peak will begin globally this decade, but it's not going to be an abrupt peak and then a sudden steep drop. It's going to be it's going to be a gradual downsloping plateau, something the likes of this, and I forgot to actually put the years on the bottom, but yeah, something along the lines of this, with the highest points there, and actually, okay, so adjust to this upwards, basically. I have no idea why it's down here. It was supposed to be here, but apparently I typed stuff in wrong. But yeah, going up like this, and right around later 2020s, like 2027, 8 is probably around where you'll get like the highest point, and then it begins tipping into this. And technically, here is 2030, so everything here and beyond is not the rest of this decade, but instead the next decade, which we already did in a different video. But anyways, the peak slash plateau for global production will start during the later part of this decade. And specifically, that's around when the highest point of global production should be reached. And this was accounting for various things. In this, I did factor in Russia's major production downturn, which they are trying to conceal under the veil of retaliatory production cuts. But I mean, they can make up whatever fairy tale they want. And but yeah, this was factoring in things like that, and various other declines and plateau ends that are about to come into play. The only thing it does not consider, obviously, is things that could abruptly happen, uh, like without warning, like the Libyan civil war restarting again, which is something that might happen this year, and some of their output like abruptly going offline, or other things, or how much of Iran's oil output might drop when the inevitable war between Turkey and Iran starts. So that's always something. The Libya one is more immediate and of a high probability, but that would probably be a brief thing for like 1 year because that's usually how long it's lasted. Every time they try to have an election, when the Gaddafi successor guy, the self-appointed ultra commander, high chancellor, field marshal general, when he doesn't win, which he never does, the elections he declares them false and then attacks. And so they have, a renewed civil war, usually lasts about a year, and then they get tired and give up and just go back to having the country split in two. But during that 1 year, every time they do this, Libya's production obviously falls off the board. So that is something upcoming later this year that might abruptly happen. But in terms of the overall trend of it, it's going to be something roughly like this, with the highest point probably in the later portion of this decade, unless other stuff happens. Anybody here? I've gone over that one before, but and actually, I mean, that's technically something that would fall into the rest of this decade category, since it's 50-50 whether that comes in the later part of this decade or in the early part of the 2030s. So Turkey is already, they've been on their whole Ottoman reclamation binge for a while. And Iran and Azerbaijan have always been pretty iffy with each other, and Turkey usually steps in threateningly to back Azerbaijan. And this portion of Iran here has something like, I think, 16 million people, most of which are Azeris, which is more Azeris than actually live in Azerbaijan. And there's been the usual stuff and accusations that uh, Iran's mistreating them and oppressing them, blah blah blah, secret genocide. The same crap Russia was trying to use to justify the Ukraine invasion, which they then immediately threw that out as their justification when Putin gave the that starting rambly speech about restoring the Russian Empire and kind of gave away the fact that it was all BS from the beginning. But something similar is going on here with the Azeri population in Iran, and A- Azerbaijan and Iran have been getting pushy with flying, not like huge ones, but flying like brief sorties of fighter jets into each other's territory. And Turkey has made it pretty clear that when that lights off, which it inevitably will, probably on their terms, that they are going to step in. And so that's going to light that off, which the end result, given that Turkey is more proficient and the people are a bit more solidified there than in Iran, especially at the present moment, and how much in a much more fragile state Tehran has set itself with its recent actions and the wrath of its own people coming against it. It's not going to go Iran's way. Turkey is going to win that one, with the end results obviously being whether it gets recognized by the international community or not. Again, that's an aside thing. Uh, when I like phrase this stuff, I'm just saying what will happen, like de facto, is that Iran will be forced to let go of the Azeri provinces, and that will rejoin Azerbaijan, which will give Turkey an extension to the Caspian Sea, more staging area around here, like they're gaining in northern Syria as they invade while not invading, to inevitably do their whole thing with northern Iraq, which is going to come towards like 2040. But at that point, when they do that, that's going to draw us against them, in which case then they're going to get hammered. But they are going to inevitably throw down with Iran over the whole Azeri stuff. Like that's been festering for a few generations, but over the last like decade or so, it's really started to like start simmering. And now that as Azerbaijan has been getting really bold with their recent stuff with Armenia, they're nowhere near as hesitant as they used to be to start stuff. And regardless of whether they actually started, which they almost certainly will be the ones to actually start it, because Iran's not exactly interested in a war with them, since they're constantly paranoid that they're going to end up at war with us or with Saudi Arabia. Granted, even with our equipment, Saudi Arabia would probably still suck. Um, but so yeah, Azerbaijan is almost certainly going to be the one to actually like start that off, which won't matter to Turkey. Turkey's going to come in for them anyways, and so then Iran's going to lose, and that is something that that we would have gotten to in this stream anyways, because that's something that's potentially going to happen during the remainder part of this decade in the later 2020s, like 50-50, either later this decade or the first half of the 2030s. It's 50-50 either way, because uh, first things first for Turkey is they kind of want a brief little scuffle with Greece. They don't actually want a war. They just want like a few aerial engagements to sort of test their drones, and they're well aware that they're not actually going to get those islands back, but they also kind of need NATO to turn on them so that they have internally for internal politics the excuse of being the black sheep, of being mistreated and shunned, so that they get kicked out instead of just walking away, and that then like internally for internal politics, sets them in the same position, ironically, that Russia is trying to frame itself internally of being of the righteous cause of truth, and everyone is against us and hates us, and they all hate us unjustly because they're what's Russia's most recent line? I don't know which one they were going with most recently, whether it was the everyone's jealous of us or the everyone else in the world worships Satan or something like that. But yeah, they're gonna Erdogan's already been doing the blah 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 envy of Turkish greatness nonsense. So they're only going to keep ham fisting that even further. And if uh, things might diverge a bit if he loses in the upcoming election. However, there's also, given his little fake coup attempt in 2016, there's also the chance that he might just make sure he wins, quote unquote, there. All right, so that covers that then. What else do we have here? All right, well, might as well stick with oil while we're on oil. Uh, Now getting away from the turkey stuff at least. Where's my cursor? There it is. So Mexico is finally recovering a bit of its oil production, and that trend is going to continue. Let's get their oil production up. COP. So this is Mexico's oil production. Long term, they peaked around 3.5 back in the mid 2000s. Since then, they've been on their decline with a few stops. This one here obviously was that stop came about because of things they were able to do because of that period back here of high prices. Crashed down here and finally have been stalling out for a while and around 1.7, and just now they have taken a turn up to 1.8 as one moderate field that was slated for this year has come online. And there's one other, I believe, along with two decently sized ones that should be coming online in 2025, I believe, which should in total boost them back up over two. And there's one other project for like later in the 2020s. So over the course of the remainder of this decade, over the next 7 years, Mexico's oil production, they should have enough stuff slated out and remaining in the ground or under the sea to come back up to around like 2.1 or 2.2 right as we hit 2030 and go into the 2030s. And then from there on, that's next decade. That's not this decade. So for the subject of this decade, they should, over the course of it, get back up to around 2.1 or 2.2 million barrels per day because they still do likely have a decent chunk in the Gulf, as they have only explored this area. So, this area up here near the border with Texas is basically untouched. They've explored this chunk a bit, but not fully, like only half. And this bumpy area, they've done some stuff in. This area here has been mostly explored, but then this whole area reaching off of the Yucatan here is basically untouched. So they still likely have a lot of stuff offshore in the Gulf. They also, the Eagle Ford Shale extends into Mexico a bit up around here, and they haven't really done anything with it yet. They don't necessarily have the technicalities and the expertise for it. So that would have to be most of the U.S. industries that come in and do that, which wasn't really an option until recently because Mexico has been primarily done by Pemex or their state-owned oil industry. However, they have stopped that like requirements now. So now actual like private oil industries are allowed to start buying tracks and bidding on stuff and coming in and working things. So they might be able to do some Eagle Ford stuff, but that won't be like a huge contributor. Most of what they have is stuff that remains in the parts of the Gulf that they haven't touched. As they're everything minus the Eagle Ford shale, everything that they had onshore has long since been found. But uh, offshore they still have quite a bit. So over the course of this decade, they should get back up to 2.1 or 2.2, which will keep them just barely an oil exporter. As once they finally recover from the whole COVID demand crash, back up to their pre-COVID demand level of about 1.9, they should resume their slow demand growth from that. And by the end of this decade, demand-wise, they would probably be around just over 2 or maybe as high as 2.1. So with a oil production level of around 2.1 to 2.2 by that time, they will still maintain themselves just barely as an exporter. Whereas previously, for the last several years, they were a net importer again, because you see right there, obviously they fell below 1.9 in production, which is their 1.9 is their normal demand level pre-COVID, and only because of the COVID demand crash did they become a net exporter again. However, they have recovered a decent chunk of their demand. They're back up to about 1.6 or a bit above it. So they were almost, and their production was previously holding out at 1.7. So the gap was closing, but now they've jumped up to 1.8 with this new field. But then, that gap might close further again over the course of this year in particular. So we'll see how that goes. Anything new? Nope. Super chats? Nope. All right. Next, there. All right. Over to the Persian Gulf, where we have some developments coming in the form of, at least my expectation, Iraq. I really, really think is going to end up leaving OPEC, and that would probably be during this decade. Like they might have a few more years of patience, but they've been getting really tired of it because they are capable of probably upwards of 7 million barrels a day at least with everything that currently is known and is set up with additional workings and likely additional discoveries, as not even all of the country has been explored, especially the conflicted interior Kurdish portions where Saddam used to, do stuff to the people there. So likely they could be going even higher than 7. However, they have been constantly held back, not even able to go up to 5, because Saudi Arabia constantly keeps calling for production cuts, and their part during the later 2010s one was to just hold at 4.7 and not increase. Then came the mega production cuts in light of the COVID price crash, and they were finally going up again. They were back up to 4.7, heading towards 5, and then Saudi Arabia demanded new production cuts again. So Iraq has been getting pretty tired of it, and I really see them departing the organization sometime soon, as other members have, like Qatar. Qatar was tired of being restricted, as they were being kept around 800,000 barrels per day when they could have been doing, upwards of 1.5. And at the moment, they are opting to maintain a plateau of about 1.3. Specifically, usually they're right around 1.32, which they weren't allowed to do in OPEC because, of uh, the organization, aka basically just Saudi Arabia, dictating limits to things. And so Iraq is getting tired. They want to actually produce what they're capable of, so they can earn more national income. But Saudi Arabia runs OPEC in the interest of Saudi Arabia. So Iraq is likely going to depart OPEC soon enough. I would be really shocked if they don't leave during this decade, like within the next several years, because Saudi Arabia is going to keep doing this for their own various reasons related to the limits of their own production plateau coming up. But Iraq still has a gargantuan amount in the ground and could be, pumping at least 7, if not more. They would really like to be pumping at least 7, if not more. So if Saudi Arabia keeps this up, then Iraq is gone. They're going to leave. And I don't, I really don't see Saudi Arabia stopping what they're doing anytime soon, because they kind of have to maintain the image that they want. So basically, it's kind of deadlocked that Iraq is going to leave. And obviously, as I said, once they do leave and aren't, obeying Saudi Arabia's arbitrary constrictions anymore, then they will bring their production up to 6 to 7 million barrels per day. That bit would be able to come pretty fast. Going beyond that, though, towards like probably maybe 9, that would take an additional number of years, bringing on new discoveries and stuff, several of which were made recently but are just kind of waiting, and extensions of additional fields down here around Basra that have always been able to produce more, but they've never gotten around to completing things because they've been held back from it. checking for more. What else do we have in oil? Oh, yeah. The Venezuela-Guyana situation, I guess. We should go to that one. First, anything from anybody? Yes, I was aware of the re-push in Bakhmut, but uh, I'm more I'm more concerned or anticipating of the actual counteroffensive in the south to cut the neck. But what do you mean my bit rate is zero? Is my bit rate zero? No, it's not. Stop lying, YouTube. We will get to the Ukraine stuff, obviously, uh, soon-ish. I'll probably have that as like the middle point for the stream, I guess. But moving on here, for something coming this decade, at least most likely, like 80, 80+% chance this is something that will fall under the category of the rest of this decade, is the Venezuela-Guyana issue that will inevitably turn into a U.S. versus Venezuela conflict, which will not last very long because Venezuela doesn't really have a military. So this dotted line you see here on Guyana, Venezuela claims that the entire western two-thirds of Guyana belongs to them, and they've only really started pushing that again like very recently, as things have deteriorated in Venezuela, and so Maduro, I think Maduro is still the one in charge in Caracas. You know, like all totalitarian dictators do, that you want something to drum up some national fervor when you've ruined everything for the country so bad that the people despise you. However, the issue is things are so despairingly bad for everyone in Venezuela that they don't care. Like he's trying for the lost land, blood in the soil thing, but nobody in Venezuela actually cares about it because their lives have turned so far down economically that they're not even paying attention. But he's because as things drift that far, both IRL and in his own mind, that's inevitably where stuff ends up going. Uh, so probably going to try something with Guyana. Most likely, it's going to be more like attempting fast boat pull-ups to some of the drilling platforms offshore to like have his ski mask wearing uh, black bag squad board the oil platforms to take them over and claim them as Venezuelan property because that's about all he can really do. Because, like I said, Venezuela doesn't really have a military, and or they do, but their military at this point consists of dudes wearing ski masks that drive around in jeeps and black bag people in the middle of the night and make them disappear for speaking out against the government. They do have like a dozen uh 80s or 70s era fighter jets supposedly, but their government's like their the government budget itself, not just their military budget, but the entire Venezuelan government budget like could not even really uh mount up to the maintenance costs to maintain a dozen fighter jets anymore. So they really have nothing except dudes in ski masks with some AKs, some jeeps, and some speedboats. And so they're going to pull something, uh, you know, try to show off, which is then going to bring the U.S. hammer down on them, which is going to end up with Maduro out and some new governments coming about in Caracas, most likely one that will allow uh, outside oil industries back in. And from there, whatever new government comes about in Caracas, From that point, then Venezuela's oil production will actually come back online and potentially actually exceed their prior 3 million barrel per day plateau because the Orinoco Belt is capable of actually like giving them something around 5 to 6, which they would be able to hold for the entire rest of this century. But we'll see how that goes. The Venezuela Guyana thing resulting in U.S. versus Venezuela for like 2 days is most likely coming this decade. I'd call that like 80% chance. And all right, who else do we have? Or what else do we have in line with? Uh, no, no, here. Oh, I guess I could do the price thing. So oil during the remaining course of this decade will be taking a fun price journey. So see the various prices it's been over the course of time. You know, way low, everything was cheap and awesome, and first oil production peak, drop, and still constrained supply for quite a while. Libyan civil war, Syrian civil war, ISIS and stuff. ISIS gets crushed around then, and prices collapse. And demand was pushing things back up. Then we had COVID, price crash, come up to here, right about here, and you have Russian invasion of Ukraine, that spikes up, and things drop back down to right around now, where they're at, 73. However, that's a bit too low. They really should be around 80 to 90, but they're doing the whole, but what about the banks and the interest rates thing? So as we go further into this decade, uh, once the Ukraine stuff is over and Russia's third and final collapse becomes blatantly apparent, that it's going to be a thing that's going to come about. That is going to cause a temporary price scare that's going to flare up. And once it settles back in, they're not going to suddenly drop off the face of the earth overnight. They're going to have a systemic, production decline of a specific amount each year for a while, like they did after the USSR collapse. Once the rational reality of that sets in, then prices will drop back down from that. However, various things will be keeping prices quite elevated, like the Venezuela-Guyana stuff. Uh, Ecuador is both declining and also is becoming prone to the same kind of disruptions that copper production is in Peru with like environmental protests and everything. And then there is always, the issue of Libya abruptly going offline, removing 1 million barrels per day of production from the global scene every time they try to have an election. Sudan is gone now since they descended into chaos, but they weren't a major producer anyways. Angola is on the decline. Nigeria is not turning things around anytime soon. So their capacity is continuing to slip as their whole infrastructure system continues degrading, and politicians keep stealing the oil industry's money for themselves. And also, oil pipeline theft and stuff continues with like literal oil theft cartels springing up and stuff. And then obviously demand itself globally continuing to push upwards, with a few exceptions, but those aren't like big enough. So all in all, oil is going to be sticking pretty close to the triple digit line over the remaining course of this decade and gradually creeping its way up, and is at a few points going to have some mega spikes upwards towards, and some maybe even in excess of 200 barrels per $200 per barrel. So that is coming when so in like backwards reference, when I say you're going to see several times like 200 plus dollars a barrel during the 2020s, I'm not saying like that's going to become the average price it sticks around at. In reality, the average price that it sticks around at is going to make its way closer to around 100 like it was back in the early 2010s, and it's probably going to stick around there. However, it will have several massive upward surges like that, some of which are almost certainly going to flare up into the 200s. I check on everybody. Just comes up in. Uh, I don't know how I would respond to it because I don't know what it is. I mean, if you're just saying opposing mine, then uh, the opposition to my analysis would be that I guess the opposite of my analysis would be to claim that Russia is winning, which is stupid and uh, implies that you're really mentally dense, and that every massive failure they've had was intentional and it was just a feint. It's just a feint. It's just a feint, bro. It's a strategic withdrawal. It's a regrouping. Don't look at the videos of the hundreds and thousands of dead Wagners. And in Bakhmut, Russia doesn't use infantry meat waves. Russia's more dignified than that. Russia, 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 Russia strong, Russia strong. What's happening is people are having a psychological issue with the image that they had. Not that like even if they didn't like Russia, people are people from like even my own parents actually had this for a while after the start of things. Like people that had the image in their head for so long that Russia was like a peer power to the US and Russia was like legitimately a military superpower. When you have like something that hard of an image in your head get completely shattered, half the time you're mentally going to reject it and do like gymnastics and backflips completely out of your way to try to insist that what you've thought all this time is still the case, which is a bit of inherent human narcissism. I'm not saying it's like actual narcissism, it's just a bit of like, it's a bit of human, uh, it's like psychological self defense mechanism narcissism, because your brain on a subconscious level is thinking like, if this image is truly incorrect, then that means that you believed something deeply wrong, that you like made a wrong choice, and that would cause, at least at the subconscious level, a lot of self-doubt issues. So your brain's going to try to avoid that. But the whole situation and Russia's failure and impending collapse is kind of obvious. Like I can't really do anything more than let the obvious speak for itself. The counteroffensive is coming up in the second half of this month, and with that, actually, I'll pull up my map. I'm not saying this is like the exact route or anything, but something relatively. Go to the image that I pulled up. Thank you. But something relatively along these lines. So this is current line of control for Russia. This narrower orange part, that's the portion that's outside of HIMARS range. And these are the concentrations with gaps here and there and some right along the river right there. So They might do a river hugging push like this and then come down there to chop the neck at its weakest point. Uh, though I still feel like 51 to 49, the most likely thing is going to be to come through the gap here and then swing like that behind the lines. And once you have a massive force piling in behind your lines have to collapse, or else you kind of get wiped out. So something along the lines of this, push in that immediately cuts the HIMARS free region, swing around, broaden things, keep pushing, force the line to collapse, and now once you have this free area, the entire land bridge to Crimea is in HIMARS range, and you keep pushing, everything has to collapse. It will consolidate around here. Russia will absolutely try to maintain this portion right here as a buffer to make sure that Crimea itself stays out of HIMARS range. And once that's clear, then you bring your forces across the river and gather everything later on, possibly during the winter, and do this. Cut the neck at its absolutely weakest point, and once that's gone, then kind of have to give that up. Russia still tries to hold on to this, again, to keep Crimea out of HIMARS range. And then over the course of most likely winter and then into early spring of next year, you have a withering battle of gradually withering things down. Crimea creeps into HIMARS range. And as actual frequent bombardment strikes start landing on Crimea, Russia's internal greatness and security image begins to shatter because Crimea is one of the three things that Russia actually cares about in terms of what is actually Russia. Like drone striking all those transformers and power stations in Belgorod, Russia doesn't really care. However, they start to care once the drones showed up in Moscow and once they showed up in St. Petersburg that one time, because those two things, along with Crimea, are the three things that Russia actually cares about. And so once stuff starts happening in Crimea, once it becomes clear that Crimea is not safe, the great and mighty Red Army cannot actually protect its own citizens, then things start to fall apart internally. And the Crimean push and stuff like that, that doesn't come until next year. The counteroffensive of this year over the course of this summer and into early fall is primarily going to be about Zaporizhia and Kherson. And I mean, I've been saying, stuff like this since the beginning of the war. Once the failures became obvious and they had to pull out of the north, basically the end conclusion of this was set. And I even phrased it as the final fall of a dead empire. And I was told I was wrong. And Russia great, Russia strong, Russia win. And then they got pushed out, and then they got pushed out again, then they got pushed out again. And I don't know, I keep hearing the same thing: Russia strong, Russia strong, Russia strong, Russia awesome, Russia is winning. Yeah, no, get over it. They're not a superpower. You never actually were. All you have is nukes. A quarter of them at minimum don't even work because your military budget doesn't match the actual required, even just material costs of maintaining them. And also, your equipment doesn't work either. You've kind of proven that when half your vehicles just break down on the road in their way to the battlefield. You have managed to capture a few villages at the cost of tens of thousands of lives in meat waves that are like on video. So it's not like just people claiming stuff. These things are literally being recorded. So you can't hide from this reality. I mean, if capturing Bakhmut at the cost of 20 to 30,000 lives is what Russian greatness is, then so be it, I guess. But that's also going to end with uh, a different version of Russian greatness, which is going to be not Russia. Well, this is going to be Russia, but Federation's going to split apart. Dagestan, Chechnya, Kalmykia, Bashkiri, and Tartarstan break off. Not really sure what's going to happen with Kaliningrad. Siberia as a whole, there's going to be basically a split down the middle of the country because once you get past a certain point, past Novosibirsk, is about where the attachment to the western portion of Russia seems to die out, at least from Russians from the eastern chunk that I've spoken to, and especially the hatred of Moscow and the Russian core gets really strong once you get over into like the Far East. And they actually did try to break away during the 90s. However, that was brutally suppressed. And Moscow has actually tried to bury the history of that, even. But unfortunately, this isn't the 1800s, which they seem to consistently think it still is. So you saying something didn't happen and like burning the newspapers doesn't really erase the history of it. Uh, I mean, Turkey has the same issue with, constantly assuming that claiming that there was no Armenian genocide somehow makes the Armenian genocide disappear. Chance that Tuva and Buryatia break off. Not entirely certain though. Uh, Basically, entirely after the split down the middle, what happens in Siberia, like amongst the portions of Siberia, that passes completely out of what I will phrase as my like determinable range. So there might be some like further segmenting out there, or it might stay together as like one chunk. But the whole fragmentation thing is not really going to like come into full being and be finalized until the later parts of this decade, like very close to 2030. Usually, when I do like time lapse projections, for instance, I usually like have the map change into this. I usually just set it for 2029, sometimes 2028. Like a lot of people who agree that Russia is going to split up, constantly like push it as early as 2025. But I think bit uh, that's a that's a bit out there. Later 2020s is a bit more likely than that. And there was one other down here, either Carache or Cabardino, that might go, but they're like a 50-50. But these are the only ones that like would really are really solidly going to break off, because they're the only ones that like blatantly, vocally, even to this day, have said that they want to, and if stuff happens, they're going to. The others, like Udmurtia, which is right about here, and Mordovia, which is over here. The other would-be republics have actually like outwardly expressed, for the most part, that they wouldn't really be interested, but they could just be saying that to appease Moscow for all I know, and they might secretly want to. But as for the ones that like solidly would, it's primarily just Dagestan, Chechnya, Kalmykia, Tatarstan, and Bashkiri, and then a giant split down the middle. But that's going to start up in a few weeks. I would say I've been saying the later half of this month. I mean, I wouldn't be like horrifically surprised if the counteroffensive started like before the second half of this month, but I feel like the second half of this month is what makes the most sense. And then all of that falls apart over the course of the summer and into early fall. And then you have that sort of buffer line that Russia is going to try to maintain inward from Crimea to keep Crimea out of HIMARS range. And that is going to turn into a point of whittling it down, like carving out, something from a bar of soap. And that will take place over the winter and into spring of next year. And then next year is when the actual Crimea stuff starts. Unless things deteriorate inside of Russia before that point, which they could, but I think everything's going to still like clean on. Uh, Everything's still going to clean on somewhat, and once UKR forces actually like physically cross onto Crimea, is when the like final most bottom layer of the image shatters for real. The the in terms of the losses representation, the both sides are full of it. Uh, Ukraine claims that about 200,000 Russians have died, whereas Russia still to this day has insisted that that casualty figure of 5,300 that they gave back in, I think it was April of last year, or it might have been late March. They have never added to that, and they have blatantly, like, bold-facedly to the camera. I think it was Peskov is the speaker for the Kremlin. Have bold-facedly to the camera insisted that no more Russian troops have died since then. Um, the cemeteries say otherwise, and the videos that have kind of like worn down my humanity inside of watching dozens of mobilized dudes get mowed down by machine gun fire. That those kind of say otherwise, but Russia still insists only 5,300. And Ukraine, as of the last that they spoke about their own, was confirming that it was more than 14,000, and that was in October. Uh, the most the most likely like well done well done add up that I've seen from people of like decent enough military knowledge was probably as of this was as of the start of last month, as of the start of April. It was probably somewhere around 100 to 110,000 dead Russians and roughly 50 to 60,000 dead Ukrainians in terms of soldiers. So it's a two it's a loss ratio of two Russians to one Ukrainian, about which is realistically like matching the drastic difference in performance, and also realistically matching like realism because like otherwise based on less modest claims it would have been something like a 5 to 1 ratio, but 2 to 1 is more realistic and uh extremely believable based on how quickly Russia's performance devolved, and especially with the whole Prigozhin Wagner meat wave stuff in Bakhmut, because got to get those last 100 meters so that you can claim victory somehow. And that's been one of my like things I was kind of suspecting, is that they were desperate to finalize Bakhmut to like maybe claim that like that was the last bit of Donetsk Oblast or something, and then internally they would try to claim that well, the real goal of the war is accomplished, and then they would have internally a like exit excuse for stopping it. But that's not how it's actually going to go. Sorry, not sorry. And also, that's kind of been my timing suspicion as well, is that Ukraine has no set specific day, like not a date on the calendar to start the counteroffensive. But since Wagner at least has almost taken Bakhmut after a year, Ukraine's probably going to wait several more days until until Russians actually take like the last few meters of it, and wait until like the very hour that they start circulating it on RT and stuff inside Russia as like a great victory. And the moment they start doing that, that's when they're going to punch through the lines and start setting everything off, because that would kind of be a well-timed psychological blow. The moment you finally have something to show for all this, a pile of your own dead bodies and a bunch of burnt rubble, you then have your lines punched through immediately, and your whole facade of yourself as a big strong man shatters, and you get revealed as a walking tub of alcohol that is likely to die at age 56. Well, since you sent me into that, we might as well actually go into all the other stuff that comes about because of that, which is the internal fallouts inside of Russia. Uh, already, already their birth rate, their fertility rate, uh, took a catastrophic backstep from this. So Russia's fertility rate or birth rate post USSR collapse crashed down to like between 1.1 and 1.2, like most of the other post USSR states. And they had finally recovered back up to 1.5, I believe it was. And then Putin threw it all away. So last year, it abruptly crashed down to 1.3. And remember, only, that drop would have only been like brought about from the last 3 months of the year or so, because those children, those would be the children that would have been conceived after the war started. So then, going on this year, from the first quarter data that one of Russia's dissident demographers, at least, had accrued so far, was looking like another 10% drop. So that would be 1.3 down to 1.18 children per woman, or below 1.2 once again. So if that holds, then 2 years has undone 30 years of fertility rate recovery. So congratulations, you played yourself. However, as the guy warned, it's actually going to probably be a lot worse, because the first major like economic downturn for Russia internally was the start of the war itself. The second wave was when the mobilization started in September. So children, or lack of children, that would have been conceived after that would not be showing up until the middle. A drop from that will not be showing up until the middle of this summer. So, in all likelihood, it's going to actually take a steeper drop. But at the moment, at least, if we just went by the first quarter data from this year, then it's dropped another 10%. So that would be from 1.3 down to 1.17 or 1.18. So, like I said, 30 years of fertility rate recovery erased in less than two. Congratulations. So that is going uh, to continue deteriorating, especially once this is over, and the greatness image shatters, and all of the internal strife and economic fallout from that is, as I said back in spring of last year, is probably over the course of a few years to come going to drag Russia's birth rate below 1. And apart from that, apart from the fertility rate going sub 1, they are also going to face a renewed, a renewed, 90s-esque wave of mass immigration once this is all over, and they kind of realize that the Federation is going to fracture. Then there's going to be a post USSR-esque wave of immigration. So what you will get left over with uh, in this here, what will be Russia. I'm just going to, since it's no longer federation, people keep saying Muscovy. I'm pretty sure they're just going to stick with Russia, just without the federation part. So this will be Rossiya, and this chunk here, so taking these parts off, many of them, like these ones at least, are filled with, in Russia's eyes, non-Russians. Most of Siberia, minus Tuva and Buryatia, is Russian or ethnic Russians, but they pretty much hate the western portion of Russia. So they fall off, and if uh, if this were just snapped into being right now, this portion right here, Rossiya, would probably have around 104 or 105 million people. However, because of the mass immigration that's likely going to come about, and because of, at the same time, let's go to the population stuff again. Where are we? Well, obviously be way down at Russia. R should be. There we go. Also, because the wider the wider portion of this generation is coming up into the likely to die age, especially for men in Russia. They tend to die really early from a mixture of alcohol and substance abuse and risky life decisions. And this big chunk of women here, that women typically live longer, but this chunk will be coming up into the usual age of death range. So combining that with the oncoming mass immigration and abruptly falling birth rate, this what will be left as Rossiya will, instead of the 104 or 105 it would have otherwise had if this were just snapped into being before the war, it will likely be more like 96 to 99 million people. And even after this comes into being, for at least the first few years while things are recovering, it's still going to be hemorrhaging people out. But things will almost certainly turn around fast enough. And in terms of their oil production, so when the USSR fell and they lost the budget, since a lot of stuff was state maintained, they lost the budget economically to maintain a lot of the oil and gas stuff. And also, the, you know, oil and gas engineers are kind of high income earners, so they were among the people that could afford to leave once the borders were open, so a lot of them left. They were unable, like they have become now in the absence of the Western oil industries that recovered that production. They were back then unable to maintain the more difficult Arctic and permafrost stuff. And so their production collapsed down to, actually, I have the thing here, from about 12 million barrels a day down to about 6. And then when the outside oil industries came in, they recovered it. I appear to be missing something, but yeah, so right around here, uh, outside oil industries came in and were able to then, within a few years, bring everything pretty quickly back up, and then stopped here and had gradual restoration from then onwards, because of like field degradation and stuff. And so that is likely going to happen again. The first year would own the first year would not see anything. Like I said, in spring of last year, I would not see the downturn starting until spring of this year. Well, it is spring of this year. And Russia, lo and behold, announced that they're going to intentionally, for for totally the reasons they're claiming, shut down an extra 500,000 barrels a day of oil production in retaliation against the West. Even though the West isn't the one buying their oil anymore, their friends, China and India are. So you're only hurting your own friends by doing that. But, hey, what do I know? So that is translation, a cover for the downturn. Granted, the 1.1 or so million barrels of oil production that they already shut down because of customer absence quickly following the war would have already been like enough to cover things discreetly for like a year or so. But they're jumping ahead a bit and they're turning off an extra 500,000, which they just started shutting off as of this month's data, dropping from 9.7 down to 9.6 million. Not this image here. This was from like a while ago, but and this month, funny enough, is also going to be the last month that we actually get official oil data from Russia, because as if to drive my point home further, they announced that they are going to stop publicly releasing data pertaining to their oil production. And I actually was able to find those again to make sure I could at least show. Where were they? Were they up here? Were these them? Uh, yeah, there they are. So they're going to stop publishing the data because they want to hide it. But you can't really, because you see the thing is, I can still get their internal oil demand data. Granted, they might shut that down too. And also, when you export stuff, the countries you export it from or through and to publish those numbers, and I can look at those. So I can just, do something that Putin doesn't believe in called basic math, like literal first grade addition and subtraction stuff, just with really big numbers. So that's not actually hiding anything, because anyone who can do basic math can still figure out the numbers each month based on other numbers, but they're still going to stop publishing it anyways. So, whatever. Uh, but let me see if I have that other one though. So they are going to start a downward. Was this it? No, not that one. So they are on a downward trend, a downslope from their inability to. There it is. To maintain that stuff, which dropping from 9.7, which they already had dropped down to from 10.8, down to probably 9.2, since that's what math equals. That would be enough to cover the downturn until probably the middle of next year, at which point they would have to, retaliatorily cut another 500,000 barrels per day. But anyways, if they were to drop all the way, all the Arctic and permafrost stuff goes like last time, and they fall back down to just the non-permafrost temperate climate conventional oil, then the thing is, those fields that ended at 6 million barrels per day back after the post-Soviet collapse, those fields have still been pumping and depleting all this time in the background. So, taking just a general average line, and we'll adjust it up for generosity a bit, that would probably only be about 4 million barrels per day now if they fell all the way down to that. Now, don't quote me as saying they're going to, because I'm not. I actually don't think it will drop that far. I believe they will probably, whether they keep doing it as, supposed intentional cuts, or whether they eventually admit to the fact that they can't maintain the stuff themselves, they will probably go down to like 8, maybe below that, like maybe down to 7 by the time things, not talking about the fracturing of the Federation yet, but by the time things within a few years rearrange politically in the capital, at which point then Russia will try to step back into, you know, not being the problem child of the world who also has nukes. And at, and out of a desire to recover its oil production, will let the outside oil industries back in. And like you saw in the one I showed before, it only took a few years. It will only take a few years for them, for the oil majors like Chevron and BP and ConocoPhillips and stuff, to do it again. So don't listen to like Peter Zion and stuff when they uh, constantly talk about about how like all the Russian oil production is going to be offline for decades and decades. I'm pretty sure. I'm pretty sure, since that's not the only thing he says that about. I think Peter just has like has like some weird OCD like addiction thing to saying the phrase decades and decades or something, because he seems to say it a lot, like no matter what the subject matter is. But no, it's not going to be, their stuff's not going to be offline for decades and decades. It's going to be offline for a decent chunk of the rest of this decade, but then I'd say turn around and bring back up probably the very end, and if not like the very end, then the of the 2020s. I mean, then the very start of the 2030s. And speaking of those numbers specifically, like the 8 to 7 million barrels per day, that is me referring, since the Federation is going to split apart, that is me referring to the collective total from the region that is now the country known as the Russian Federation. Obviously, their individual numbers will then break into like different ones for the different sections that like split apart. But speaking of the collective total, uh, I mean, okay, I think that is the grand summation of all the Russia, Ukraine, Russia oil, and Russia fragmentation stuff. So now, theoretically, if we were being thematic, we would move on to China and Taiwan. But I'm going to look at that to be responsible. But oh, never mind. Only one person said anything since then. The only reason it seems slow to you is because Ukraine is very limited on equipment. They have what the rest of us in NATO give them. Like if this was us, speaking of the U.S., if this was us versus Russia and Ukraine, it would this would have been like a slaughter. Seeing what their performance combat wise is like, and seeing literally like for your own eyes that what you tried to believe, in my case at least, tried to believe were just ignorant stereotypes, turn out to be true. Of like seeing in a lot of cases like their tank drivers literally tipping up the bottle like in the combat zone while like they're being fired at, and just chugging that alcohol in the middle of combat. I'm sitting there like this, no, that's not, you can't do this. What are you doing? This is supposed to be a stereotype. You're not actually supposed to do this. Alcohol is not your friend. It doesn't actually make tank shells bounce off of you. But if you want if you want like a fast version of modern war, then uh, just look at either of the U.S. Iraq conflicts. The one that was justified back in the early '90s, because that was liberating Kuwait, or the unjustified one from 2003, that was uh, is still misunderstood by a lot of people. See, here, I'll give you a quick rundown of like the actual reasons. Like people generically say it was about oil, and that is true, but people don't typically like understand how in particular. So you see this pattern here. This is Iraq's oil production, getting up like higher, going towards like 3 million barrels a day. Crash, Iran-Iraq war, stays down for a long time. Starts recovering after the war's over, goes up, and crash. Invasion of Kuwait, U.S. and coalition respond and kick them out. Recovers starting about there. Can't really maintain it because things are deteriorating and Saddam is disappearing a lot of people. And the whole des the whole despot situation and fear, kind of makes people want to flee. And just like with Russia post USSR, you know, high tech skill like engineers, like oil and gas engineers, for instance, tend to be the ones who have like the money to flee. And so a lot of them were fleeing and they couldn't, and so with what was left, they couldn't really maintain the stuff and it was coming down again. And it started to set in to those who made military decisions that this pattern isn't going to stop. The only way Iraq is going to actually like come up as an oil producer to like the numbers it's capable of is if he's gone. And someone made some ill choices. So Bush was kind of dumb, just like his dad was, and made basically the same mistake because under Bush's dad, the U.S., invaded Panama to oust, I forgot what his name was. But you see, the thing about that was, and the multiple intelligence officials and like Pentagon generals, like fully publicly called him out for this afterwards, saying that with the Panama situation, we literally uh, could have like several of the Panamanian dictators generals had offered this already. We literally could have just like given them a briefcase full of cash and that they would have offed the guy for us. And it turned out the same damn thing was true with Saddam in Iraq. The CIA could have just done the whole, slide a briefcase of money across the table, hold up a picture of Saddam, and like take a red marker and draw an X across it, and it would have happened. But Bush Senior chose invasion because he wanted to be a strong man. Bush Junior chose invasion because he wanted to be a strong man. And I mean, it kind of achieved the same result it would have, except quite a bit slower because there was a lot of damage to the infrastructure. But the whole sliding a briefcase full of money across the table thing probably would have been the better approach. It does actually tend to work when the guy in charge is like so hated that like everyone around him, even his supposedly loyal advisors, are willing to just take the money briefcase and uh, you know figuratively chop his head off. In reality, it's the modern world, so guillotines are only a thing in France. So modern thing, I guess, just a bullet to the dome. But we even learned this like later uh, when when like we were in Iraq for a while and like we were trying to find certain people and the Iraqis themselves, like some of the like local leaders, would like come up to us to like some of our guys and be like, hey, you're still looking for a general, like what's his face, and our guys would be like, yeah, and some of the local usually like city officials in Iraq would like do the hand motion to us and be like $500, and we'd like give them the money, and the next day a car would pull up to our compound, and they just open the trunk and there's the dude's body in the back that our forces were looking for the whole time. And so don't disparage it. That really was an option that we just didn't choose to go with. But that's the actual like how/why Iraq was about oil. But back to what that stemmed from. If you want an actual version of what you're imagining as modern war, or fast modern war, then look at either U.S. invasion of Iraq, either times, the justified one and then the unjustified one. Uh, and you'll see rapid modern war, and you'll also see, you know, what an actual military superpower looks like. And the funny thing is, you know, the stuff from the Russians or the Soviets at the time that that was being used by the Iraqis is still the same stuff that actually is now being used by the Russians in Ukraine because they've had to fall back to that. And actually, even now, we've seen them finally starting to wheel out the T-52s. So, you know, that's gonna be a fun party for the Leopards and the Challengers once that starts in a few weeks. Because I mean that their arm the arm on those things is not really armor. I think it's only really rated to like stop up to high caliber bullets. If tank shells of the time, if they hit at the right angle, would like deflect. But if they hit at the wrong angle, even tank shells from the time, not modern ones, not depleted uranium ones, but even tank shells from the time that the T-55s were made, still, if they hit like at the wrong angle, they would just punch straight through the thing. So that's gonna be some fun times. The only other, trying to think, I can't really think of any other. Because when you say modern warfare, I'm assuming you mean like two actual militaries, like mechanized and armored forces fighting each other, as opposed to as opposed to like interventions against like terrorism and stuff, which is usually not that interesting. There's not a lot of like fighting. Like when the stuff with ISIS happened in Syria and Iraq, there wasn't ISIS wasn't rolling around with mechanized divisions or anything. They were dudes with AK-47s and RPGs, so it was mostly just us drone striking them, which is really effective. But from your perspective, I would assume it's probably also really boring. And then from there, thematically, we move on to this. What we all know is coming. China is going to try for Taiwan. And like I said, the this year, not likely, about a 20% chance. They're going to do another assembly of force like they did last fall on the coast. And the invasion, whatever year it comes, is going to happen during fall, at least if China is maintaining any form of like brains, because fall is when the waters in the Taiwan Strait are the calmest, and calm waters mean a shorter journey for the craft that are crossing it. And so the difference between crossing the strait in fall versus crossing it in like spring is a journey of 6 hours versus a journey of like 10 plus hours. So that's a whole 4 extra hours that artillery and even precision munitions like HIMARS and stuff can be raining down on your incoming ships. So it is going to happen in fall because that's the only option. And next year is the first year where I say probability tips in favor of happening, and for each year afterwards. And it is going to be this decade that has effectively been sealed now. That's deadlocked. Previously, 2027 would be about the best time for China to do it, uh, or within that time frame, because by then they would have had everything built up that they wanted to, like enough of a strategic airlifter fleet and enough of a amphibious transport fleet. However, uh, at that time, when I first said that, way back, like at the start of last year, I think Taiwan was only slated to start receiving high-end U.S. stuff like Abrams and Apache helicopters and HIMARS around 2027 starting. However, ever since the Ukraine stuff started, we decided to up the schedule, and now we were supposed to start giving Taiwan stuff later this year. Turns out we already started giving them stuff last year. They have all Abrams tanks have already been seen on some of their military grounds, so we're already giving them those. They've already been seen with Patriots and SAM systems, and this year we are supposed to start giving them HIMARS. So likely we've probably already given them some, but it will at least become apparent later this year. And initially it was 2028 that they were going to receive the ultra modernized versions of the F-16. Now that's been fast forwarded to next year. And what else? What else are we handing off? Oh yeah, and so uh, Russia and people who simp for Russia on Twitter seem to fall for psyops like really easily. Like when we were saying that whole thing about being completely out of stingers, um, and then uh, and then Raytheon, I think, is the one who makes them, saying that it would take them like a decade to reconfigure their factories to make stingers again. Yeah, it turns out, you see, that was an obvious lie. As we've now started offloading literally thousands of stingers to Taiwan. So the production is actually up and running again, and it did not take at least a decade to get things reconfigured. So the psyops are pretty real, and despite previously having given at least the KGB credit for being like a good intelligence agency, modern Russian intelligence really doesn't seem all that smart, as they seem to fall for like literally everything. And also, they're not even good at lying anymore. Like the USSR was really good at lying. However, modern Russia like absolutely sucks at it. But so we started giving all that stuff to Taiwan, along with now additionally like Patriots and SAMs, although those are more for intercepting missiles and stuff, whereas the Stingers are for actually taking down aircraft. And what's the other one, the rapid maneuverability one that's mounted on a Humvee, the Avenger. We started giving them Avengers as well. And so I'm not sure when we were going to start giving them Apaches. I think that's still supposedly scheduled as 2025. But in reality, because we know this is coming, we're probably already discreetly giving them those. So we're loading them up with stuff already. So now, if China were to wait till 2027, they would be completely screwed. And their chance of success would be like negative 20%. Whereas if they went, we'll say next year, if they went next year, they would still have like a 5 to 10% chance of success. And the reason for inevitable failure is just because amphibious invasions are just no. Like the word no is like all you can really do to describe them. Like the reason D-Day succeeded when we did D-Day, us and the UK, was because the distance across the English Channel is really short, and the weather wasn't really that bad, and we'd been bombing and pounding the German positions like well enough, and they weren't actually all that fortified versus the stuff in Taiwan, which is like deep within the mountains, is where they keep quite a number of their stuff, and also uh, hold on, my brain is breaking. I try to regather it. Yeah. Also, all that existed back then was regular artillery. There was no missiles, precision munitions, or anything. So all they could do on the shores of Normandy was fire like regular artillery at incoming ships and hope they hit. Whereas, now we have things called precision munitions. So, you know, doing something like this isn't inherently suicidal, but they're still going to do it anyways because despite what some prior commenters who got themselves banned by their own request believe, uh, governments are run by people, and people don't make decisions based on rationality and actual cost versus gain analysis. People make decisions, sometimes factoring those things in, but people typically make decisions on impulse, on religiosity, and yes, uh, you can claim you're atheist all you want. Patriotism is a religion. Nationalism, it is a religion. So people make decisions on impulse, on emotional drive, personal desire, religiosity, and occasionally we factor in, cost versus gain analysis. But in China's eyes, Taiwan belongs to it, and Taiwan's made it clear that they're not coming back willingly. So China's going to try it, and likely going to fail. And actually, what the get off my screen. And the thing is, there's a high chance this is going to actually be very short. Like this is not going to last even a year like the Ukraine stuff did because for one it's an amphibious assault. So that's difficult enough already and China does not have the auxiliary logistics fleet for this. So the after enough gets sunk and enough lines get cut, it literally, no matter how much fervor you're filled with for the cause, it becomes like physically impossible. Whether you give the order to keep sending more troops or supplies, it becomes physically impossible to actually keep that run going. And so there's in all likelihood, this is actually going to be over rather quickly because their their lack of like actual ability in terms of amphibious fleets to keep delivering things and keep things supplied is just going to drown them that fast. And once you have no more ability to actually keep delivering things, either troops or supplies or vehicles to the theater, then that's it. It's over. Like it's physically over because you can't physically continue it. I mean, you could go the angry tantrum child route of then just hurling everything you have missile and bomb wise at the island and try to massacre them into submission. However, that tends not to work and tends just to like enrage the populace against you. And also, if that started happening, that would be like the guaranteed tipping point at which the US would step in, at which point then it's game over. So uh, they are going to try that, and it's going to end very fast compared to the Ukraine stuff, at least. I mean, I don't mean very fast as in like a couple hours, but compared to Ukraine likely being over after about 2 to 2.5 years is the time frame for it. This is probably going to last like a few weeks or a few months. And in terms of the fallout from this, like I was telling someone who asked at the beginning of the stream, in the immediate aftermath, because of things getting cut off, sanctions, China self sanctioning, also, like Russia did with a number of things, as a sort of retaliatory measure, even though it only punishes themselves. Uh, One of the first things you will actually see is almost completely empty toy aisles in stores, because most toys are plastic, and most cheap plastic items that aren't like for a specific purpose. Most of those are made in China, and most small electric motors that are usually for things like toys, remote control cars and stuff. Sometimes the motors for like small fans that you might put on your desk or something. Most of that's made in China. So empty toy aisle is like the first thing you're going to see, along with a sudden absence of backpacks and suitcases. A lot of those are made in China, so you will abruptly see a loss of that. And hold on, I'm trying to think. And steel prices will quickly surge by several factors, most likely on anticipation of cutoff, because although they consume a lot themselves, China also does make a lot of the world's steel, and that is what's going to cause over the rest of the decade and then into the 2030s a migration of industry back to where it previously was. France will dial themselves back up. Germany will dial themselves back up. Us in the US will dial ourselves back up because the facilities are all still there. They're just only operating on much lower capacities than they did like before 2000. And also Eastern Europe will flare back up, especially like Romania and Poland and stuff, because they have a lot of steel, a lot of like steel mills, and they were actually a big source of steel post collapse of the USSR and liberalization of the Eastern Bloc. Because for that time, from the 90s up through some of the 2000s, labor in Eastern Europe was really cheap. So that's where a lot of steel was coming from. However, once they started reaching first world country status towards the later 2000s, then steelmakers started moving elsewhere, places like China. Although some of the industry has seen this coming already and has been migrating to India. However, India is going to have its own problems eventually, but we'll get to that when the time comes for it. So steel prices will shoot up by quite a bit, and they'll remain elevated for a couple of years at least, not like 3 to 4 times, but after falling from an initial surge, they will still remain like elevated for quite a while. And in terms of all you iPhone dependent people who insist on paying $1,400 for something that costs $60 to make, uh, you might be more okay than you otherwise would have been because Apple finally got the picture and has started moving production to Vietnam and India. And I think they're up to like 50% production in India now. So if they go for it next year, enough at least critical stuff will have moved out of China by then to where it should be fine for the most part. And other electronics makers have started moving as well. Like Sony has been moving stuff down to Malaysia because they've seen this coming now. Samsung is doing a lot of stuff in Vietnam and actually bringing a lot of stuff back to Korea. And HP, the one whose computers I use, still makes a lot of stuff in China, but they have been switching over to making stuff in Texas and in Mexico. So each time I get a new laptop, it's usually like 50-50, whether it's from China or from Mexico. The Mexican ones have consistently been of more durable quality, I will definitely say that. But they are beginning to shift all that stuff over to Texas and Mexico. And even the clothing and uh, suitcases and backpack stuff that has started to move elsewhere. Granted, not to the best of places. Like a lot of it's been moving to Bangladesh, and Bangladesh isn't really going to be hanging around all that long in a stable form, at least. So that's going to bring its own problems eventually. But stuff is outfluxing from China quick enough, like just quick enough to where this the inevitable like backfiring implosion from the invasion attempt is not going to cause like a massive catastrophic supply blow to the world as a whole. However, it will still cause a supply blow, but the worst like portions of it will be to things that don't matter, like the toy aisle. And I'm forgetting one thing. There was one other thing I was gonna mention with that. What was it? What was it? My brain is failing. Man, I'm getting ancient. Oh yeah. So depending on where their GDP level is at the time of the invasion, China is not Russia. China is not like self-sufficient in a lot of raw materials, and also China is not, a massive oil and gas producer slash various metals miner. So unlike Russia, China is not going to have an oil and gas like price surge to inflate their GDP to, like make it look like their economy is not breaking apart internally, which is the case with Russia. Like Russia last year dropped from like 1.7 down to 1.55 because they were buoyed, they were floated by high oil and gas prices. Otherwise, that drop would have been that drop would have been worse, towards like 1.4. China's drop is not going to be buoyed by anything. It's just going to drop. And so, in terms of like multiple years onward in Fallout, they actually stand a chance. Now, I'm not saying they will do this, but I'd say in terms of like a bottom floor, there is a there's a chance they will like plummet as low as 12 trillion for a GDP drop, down from, if they were to start this right now, they are currently at 18.2 as of the start of this year, and will probably go to like 18.5 or 18.6 by the time we hit next year. So they will actually have a substantial drop that's not going to be buoyed by flaring oil and gas prices like Russia's was. And also, there is the Chinese fertility rate, which is already well on its way down because of the national mood in China. So it was pretty stable, and then they start doing the super Hong Kong suppression stuff, which soured the national mood on a societal level. And then 2020, COVID hits, and they go full draconian and drop from 1.5 down to 1.28. And as of the last stuff that I saw, the numbers for the end of last year looked like a bit higher than I thought they were. I thought they were down to 1.04. It looks like they're slightly higher. They only have dropped down to 1.06. So they are going below one. Even without the upcoming invasion, they are already going below one. But the fallout that's going to come from this is really going to just seal the demographic deal here. So they, like, with this factored in especially, they are they're gonna go down past South Korea. They're probably, uh, I would be surprised if they do not get as low as like between 0.72 and 0.75. If China stays higher than that, if it never goes down that far, I will be like dead shocked. And whatever year it is from now, you can call me out and tell me I was wrong. But they're definitely going there, and they're going below South Korea. South Korea, for anyone who's unaware, is 0.78 or 0.79, and they fell down there very slowly, unlike China, and have now stopped declining and have leveled out there. And it looks like maybe it might be starting to tick back up, whereas that's kind of not the case with China. The mood keeps worsening more and more the further you go. And on top of that, okay, on top of that, we're going to go into some non-invasion related numbers. These are numbers for these are numbers that would be happening with or without the invasion. Okay, or sorry, even without the invasion, these numbers would be happening. So you may have seen I did a video just a few days ago about how China's workforce is already collapsing. It peaked at about 763 million people in the mid 2010s, began gradually starting to slip down, and now precipitous drop. So it dropped by 13 million workers last year. This year, at bare minimum, it's probably going to drop by about 8. More than likely, it's going to be closer to 11. And so that is because, let us find the, let's go to China's one. There. That is because this big wing, this big population bulge from an earlier generation is aging into retirement now. And the generation that is replacing it, which would be right about here, graduating high school, is obviously, you can see if you trace a line up from there, significantly smaller than that generation up there. So their workforce is now collapsing, and it is collapsing at about twice the rate at which it grew to that 763 million level. Whereas over the 10 years from 2000 to 2010, for example, it increased by about 45 million people. It is now looking like it's going to drop by somewhere around 80 million people potentially every 10 years. And again, without any Taiwan stuff, even if that didn't happen, over the course of the rest of this decade, China's workforce will, at minimum, I am saying, collapse by an additional 60 to 70 million people. So that would drop it from 733 million at the end of last year down to around 660 million or 670 million by the end of this decade. As like my minimum expectation, it's probably going to drop lower than that. Even not even factoring in for anything related to Taiwan. But yeah, at least drop by 60 to 70 million over the rest of this decade. In terms of total population, they have already peaked. You're probably well aware at rounded up 1.413 billion. Last year, they dropped down to 1.412 billion rounded. And over the and this year, they're dropping probably from 1.412 down to either 1.41 or 1.409 billion as larger and larger brackets hit the likely death range in terms of age, and also bringing those down here and comparing the gap between them and the generations being born and how rapidly those are collapsing. There is a spare break in there a bit because of smaller generations from the famine, but then it immediately jumps up to these larger generations. So over the course of the remainder of this decade, if there was no fallout or anything from Taiwan, which I mean, Xi Jinping could suddenly grow a brain and decide to not do it for all I know. But All else considered, they will at least be dropping from uh, just over 1.41 down to around 1.37. Okay, that was probably one of the longer ones, and I probably should have checked on chat since then. But lumber is really localized. Uh, a lot in terms of like per country, and in cases where it's not per country, then it's per region. Most U.S. almost all U.S. lumber is from the U.S. What isn't comes down from Canada, and obviously all Canadian lumber is from Canada. Once you go down to like Central America, then like all lumber in Mexico comes from usually Canada because we in the U.S. use all our own lumber and then buy some from Canada, and then Canada barely uses any, so they export it to us and to Mexico. Uh, a lot of stuff in like South America comes illegally from Brazil, and a lot of stuff in Europe comes from Finland and Sweden and Austria. Previously Russia, but now that's out of the picture. Stuff in China comes from China. India comes from India, although India is running out of places to deforest since they don't really replant them all that well. But then again, neither does China. Uh, yes and no for the TSMC stuff. The things that like we would lose the machinery that's there. However, duplications of that machinery are, for security reasons, now being constructed elsewhere, primarily in the U.S. and Japan. Where which like plants would it then go to in which country? I don't know. That would get decided later. But the thing is, the stuff is made in Taiwan, but the actual technology, the actual designs and stuff, the engineering of it is drawn up in the U.S., Japan, and South Korea. So if China did it right now, um, and that's assuming that they like bomb the TSMC plants, which uh, they unless they take the Russian mentality to things, they really wouldn't do because they kind of want those for themselves. That would, since we won't give them, we won't trade with them like the advanced stuff. They are kind of intend on they were going to invade Taiwan anyways, but as a bonus, they intend on getting their hands on it by seizing it from Taiwan. So they're not going to like bomb the stuff because they kind of want it. And I mean, they might like out of anger after the invasion fails, but then again, like I said, we still have all the designs and stuff because it's designed in Japan and the US and South Korea. And also, like actual additional versions of it are now being made in the US and Japan for security reasons. Uh, all right, that's like the longest stuff. Okay, so moving on to elsewhere. Now on some shorter things. Excuse me, scroll. Thank you. So India. India over the rest of this decade will continue to be expansive. Their GDP should surpass Germany this decade, and by the end of it, be up somewhere loosely around 4.2 trillion, most likely. However, once we cross that threshold and roll into the 2030s, then it's going to start feeling some weight dragging it down because once we get that far, the whole groundwater depletion stuff is going to start becoming really apparent. The actual like full blown depletion won't be until around 2040, but in several regions at least, which will then cause cascading problems into others, it is going to start becoming visible as we hit the later part of this decade in a few years. So that, along with a lot of the government suppression and ethnic violence that started to spring up, like over there in Manipur and over in Punjab and uh, up in their oh damn, I completely forgot Kashmir, the Kashmir region. But like there was a huge like business halt of like a bunch of stuff in the Punjab region because the government literally cut off communications and internet for an area of almost 30 million people for days because they were trying to hunt down this one like separatist leader and they didn't want him getting like warned on Twitter or something. So they just shut down all communication for almost 30 million people for like days on end just because they were trying to arrest this one dude. So with their government starting to make like really irrational decisions, that's going to start compounding and is going to start weighing them down a bit. But they still have too much going at the moment and too much momentum. So they are going to exceed Germany and get up to at least around like 4.2 by the end of this decade. And like I've said before, they will still end up exceeding Japan, getting up over 5. But then once the groundwater depletion stuff truly strikes around like 2040, then it's all coming down. In terms of oil demand, now that they are completely back up to normal and have resumed growing in that regard, by the end of the decade, they should be probably up to around between 6.5 and 7 million barrels per day, rounded probably around like 6.7. In terms of electricity demand, probably will be close to hitting 300 gigawatts. Their current average at the moment is about 200, and their demand has been growing by like between 12 and 18 gigawatts per year for the last several years as they try to bring electricity to everybody, and as a lot of industry and stuff has been moving in. Then over here, we are going to I'd say it's highly likely it's coming within the remainder of this decade. I'd call it like, let's say 65 to 35 in terms of odds. Egypt bombing the dam. Sudan is kind of out of the picture for letting them use their airfields at the moment. So if Sudan restabilizes under one of the two military leaders, then that allowance alliance will return and Egypt will be able to do things a lot easier. However, even if Sudan remains like unstable, Egypt is still going to do it. It's just going to be a lot more risky because they're going to have to send their fighters down with drop tanks to make it that far and back. And having drop tanks kind of is heavy, and so it makes you less maneuverable and slower, and also less stealthy. So you are way more easily painted by anti-air systems. So that's and also it uh, having to go that far, even with drop tanks, leaves you with way less loiter time. So they'll only have like 10, maybe 15 minutes of time on site to like jink around, bait out anti-air missiles, and drop countermeasures to get them deflected and stuff, and then actually drop munitions on the dam. But the likelihood of that happening is has cemented itself for all intents and purposes at this point. Like I said, more likely than not, during the remainder of this decade at some point. I say the odds as like 65 to 35. And the thing is, in the wake of that, losing the dam and that failure compounded with all of the separatism already rising up and the ethnic massacres that have been occurring in different parts of Ethiopia, that will be like a final death blow, kind of like in a vastly different way, though, like Crimea will be to Russia. That's going to end up shattering Ethiopia. And as I've shown before, where's Ethiopia? Where is it? There it is. So this is the post-shattering Ethiopia, as these three regions here, Tigray, Afar, and Damara, are the ones that are like, non-Ethiopian for the most part and really don't want to be involved. And, Tigray already tried to break away, to which Ethiopia responded by, you know, killing 1 million plus people via starvation and medicine denial. So once you make those kind of decisions as a government, you've sealed your fate. So this is basically locked in one way or another. And then there is a chunk over here that is like mostly Somali, but whether like it's not like exactly, organized into a like Somali governed region the way that the Tigray, Afar, and Amar regions are like semi-governed by themselves. So whether that goes anywhere will remain to be seen. But definitively, this is at least the guarantee of what would come out of Ethiopia shattering. Uh, how long the full fragmentation would take, like after losing the dam, I can't say. But this will be an ultimately inevitable result of it. And be a responsible streamer and check chat. Any super chats? No. The good old days are gone. I miss Nebraska because getting $20 drops was fun. Speaking of Punjab, how likely is it? Uh, I don't actually, I don't actually think that that would be all that likely. The particular movement is strong. Like it is a very like fervent movement, but it's not a majority movement. It's not like a huge chunk of the population that wants it. Whereas it's kind of the opposite story for Balochistan over in Pakistan, over in Pakistan, and Pakistan. I don't know, I don't know how many of you guys saw, but Pakistan kind of just descended into chaos overnight over the last 24 hours because the military junta that effectively rules the country now arrested the former prime minister, which is basically an admission that they're never going to give up power. And so now the people are rightly so pissed off and have taken to the streets and have been setting military vehicles and buildings on military bases on fire. And so, that's descending into that. So I said in my potential changes to the world map video stream a while back that not like a guaranteed thing. It's not a thing that's like I say like is pretty likely to happen, but the break off of Balochistan from Pakistan is a definitive like possibility. It's not something that I put over that 50% line of like this is probably going to happen, but it is something that's over, I'd say, like the 25% line, that zone in between 25 and 50%, to where I say, like, this is a pretty definitive possibility. Don't be shocked if you see Balochistan break off. But I mean, if this would not be this decade, though, your question about the Punjab stuff, this is getting into like 2040s and beyond. If India descends really badly into disarray, then maybe. But then there would also be some other stuff that would that would be happening in that case, like mass death from lack of food. Right. The U.S. We got some stuff for the U.S. So major things for the U.S. In terms of water in the Southwest, heavy amounts of snowmelt are keeping Lake Mead and Lake Powell from dropping further this year, it seems, at least for the most part. So they have both been stalled by 1 year. Their like end of the line date has been postponed by a year each. However, it's not enough, nor would it be really to undo all the water volume that has been lost. So instead of uh, instead of next year, Lake Powell will most likely drop below the water line for power generation in 2025, maybe 2026 if another good year comes. Lake Mead will uh, get down to its line most likely around like 2027 or 2028. So both of those are coming still during the remainder of this decade. So that will be a power generation loss of 2 gigawatts from Hoover Dam and 1 gigawatt from Glen Canyon Dam, 3 gigawatts of power generation loss total. Effectively, not really that much. That's not even 1% of uh, the US average demand. But that will be an issue for communities immediately around the area because uh, electricity gets used like along its lines as it radiates out from where it's generated. So people were like trying to say stuff to me like it won't matter because they can just buy electricity from Texas. That's not how it works. The electricity gets lost over the distance as it's generated, and the you don't electricity you don't email it. You don't ship it with Amazon. It travels along wires and gets used as it travels, as it radiates out. So there will be like a weakness of current in those areas. Most of those are smaller communities, so it won't affect that much, but it will kickstart the larger part of the southwestern emigration to elsewhere in the country wave. Las Vegas, in terms of power generation, will still be mostly okay because it has several gas-fired power plants around it. But the insanely high water bills that will be hit by that point several years from now are going to start driving people out. Uh, anyone who was not already driven out, by 120-degree temperatures, like a sane person would be driven out by. But then again, that's me speaking, me from Alaska, where I would really like to return home to, but kind of need to have like a minimum income level of around like 650 or 700 a month for that, which I presently do not have. And in terms of oil production, the U.S. will peak this during the remainder of this decade in the mid 13s. Uh, so around the middle between 13 and 14 million barrels per day, and then will start its decline from there, and uh, could at least drop back below 12 by the time the decade ends. In terms of gas production, the U.S. In terms of natural gas, it at present is like 112 or 113 billion cubic feet per day, and it's starting to level out in the range I expected. I expected a plateau anywhere between like 109 and 118 or 119. And so it is going to keep creeping up a bit, still being pushed by the Haynesville Shale, but other stuff is going to start weighing on it. And it's probably going to plateau out around like, I don't know, 115 or 116 maybe. And it's going to keep that through the rest of the decade and even into a decent part of the 2030s before decent drop chunk is going to come. All right, who else do we have and where? Over here, during the remainder of this decade, Japan and South Korea both will have their workforces uh, peak and begin to contract. Like we'll look at Japan's, for example, as theirs have stayed, in South Korea's case, stayed kind of steady, and in Japan's case, has actually still kept growing a bit at least, although it's started to level out over the last year or so. And yeah, because they're the thing that like differentiates them is, let me close these. The thing that differentiates them from like China, whereas China has those really, really early retirement ages, Japan has a very different work culture, a very oppressive, toxic work culture. It's become a relatively known fact worldwide. You know, of they don't work 8 hour days over there. They work like 14 hour days over there, and works 6 days a week, sometimes six and a half. And they don't retire at 62. They retire at death, basically. And that's not even a joke, really. It, essentially they retire at death. So their workforce is going to start actually contracting as we get through the later part of this decade, because this wider part here is going to start dying out, and then contrast that line down with the portions right about here, graduating high school and entering the workforce. Those will then outweigh those, and so the workforce will actually start contracting. And essentially, it's the same deal with South Korea. So those are coming for those two. However, they're not going to be the like cascading precipitous drop that China is seeing. And then some other population stuff for elsewhere. The Netherlands is a country with flat lines down because they have immigration. Where did I put the Netherlands? Were they out here? Were they one of these? No. This one? There we go. Okay. So when you see countries that are kind of straight down like this instead of contracting, that usually means either their fertility rate is around replacement level, which the Netherlands is close to, and or also they actually have immigration. So this is from 2022. It's now 2023. So push this up one bit further, up to 77 for this age line here, and contrast it down there. And this the line here is about to hit life expectancy for the Netherlands and start dying, and it's kind of an even match for down there for the moment, plus immigration. So instead of a contraction, the Netherlands population is going to level out and plateau, and they will do so, should be right at 18 million, I believe. Let's just check real quick. I believe they're at 18 million, or at the moment they're at like 17 and a half. So they should peak and plateau at 18 million. Yep, 17 and a half. So yeah, about 18 million they'll level out and peak. Serbia, who is already declining because no one wants, Serbians don't want to live in Serbia. We go over here. They've already been declining primarily because of emigration. People are just leaving from 7.5 million all the way down to 6.8 now. They are going to be facing a upcoming abrupt abrupt dive because of their low birth rate. You can see how low that is down here. This is for 2020, so that was a few years ago. So these generations that would be at this level now are even smaller. So around like here, you'd say, and draw the line up here, and you see how big the gap is between those and where that line would be. And these, uh, again, move all of these up by 3 years because it's 2023. It's right about here. And this group is this huge bulge is just about to pass into the death expectancy range for Serbia. So, on top of what they are already seeing because of emigration, they are about to hit a turn into an even steeper decline because that wider population bulge is about to hit their life expectancy area. Who else do we have and where? Thailand is at about 66 million people, and they're sort of peaking at the moment, kind of, but not entirely yet. But they are about to finalize that, as this is again from 2020. So these bottom generations will be a bit smaller, back to like here, and these generations will be a bit few years further up. So as we hit towards the very end of this decade, so move those up by like another 7 years up to there, hitting the life expectancy range for, we'll do this one, and then you draw that line down, and it overtakes the bottom generations by a bit. So Thailand's population is going to level off and start declining by a little bit, not by a huge amount. And then back into some specific resources, we have silver, the one I talk about the most, the one that's going to have one of the largest jumps. And it has recovered half of the way that I said it needs to, because it really does not belong lower than $30 per ounce right now with how the supply situation is. And it has recovered back up to 25 or $26 an ounce. And during this, the remainder of this decade, it is going to inevitably flare up past its previous, most recent records of around like 50, and it's going to be going up to like 70, 80 plus in terms of dollars per ounce. Uh, I don't think so immediately, but there are chances it might flare past 100. It'll all depend on things, but for those who aren't aware, we do this. And so, because of higher prices comparatively at the time, back here, this led to a major expansion of silver production across these decades, which kept silver prices really low, which curtailed mining expansion hugely, which then saw the silver inventories that were built up over this during this oversupply period, getting up to 2 billion ounces in storage. Those inventories were drawn down to compensate over the last 20 years or so. And there there was the financial crisis, which caused price spikes, and the acknowledgement of the supply issue that has now caused these higher prices, although they're still not as high as they should be. So this has allotted for some additional mines and mine expansion, but not enough to really stop it. So silver inventories are now down all the way to 270 million ounces in storage. So almost down to only 10% of what they were 20 or so years ago. And if they follow the pace, then they're probably going to go down to like 250 or 240 million remaining by in terms of excess storage inventories by the end of the year. And so the margin, the physical margin there continues dwindling. And uh, copper is finally uh, as the decade rolls on, it's going to eventually cross the line, cross the threshold up into, after having this step up to averaging around 3, as we go towards the remainder part of the 2020s, especially getting towards the end, it's going to cross the threshold into remaining as its average above $5 per pound, with occasional jumps up to like between $6 and $10 a pound, as supply is going to be not peaking just yet. Global copper production isn't going to peak until probably the 2030s. However, things are going to start getting curtailed and like start leveling out. And also, there's been a lot of disruptions that I've talked about a few times, especially from major producers like Peru. There's been a lot of environmental anti-mining protests that have constantly forced them to shut stuff down. And in Chile, the government has taken a huge environmentalist turn and has constantly denied permits for expanding operations at some of their major copper mines. So that's going to be hampering things. Additionally, outside of what would naturally be occurring. So that is some stuff that's going to come about because of that. And while we're at that, let's swing over here to South Africa. I promise I'll look at chat after this. So South Africa is in a really precarious situation. They are on the brink of a complete power grid collapse, like full breakdown, national blackouts, like system failure that would take at least 3 weeks for a full blown restart. And if that were to happen, which it now is like in the range of something that's really, really possible, that would push the country like over the edge into anarchy, because they've already been like on the fringe of that with internal issues that I won't mention because I'll get myself flagged for talking about those. And also because the economy has gotten so terrible that everyone feels like kind of despondent, like nothing's going to come out of anything. And you want to hear something insane? Their unemployment rate has exceeded a third of the entire country. So you have a third of your entire working population with no jobs, no form of income to support themselves and their family. And things are only getting more expensive because of how like you're mismanaging the government, and the power is off for 10 plus hours a day because the system is falling apart. And a lot of those people who don't have jobs are resorting to raiding power substations and stealing the copper out of them because that's the only thing they can do to like get any money. You've created your own upcoming collapse. And if that does happen, the abrupt disruptions to various things will cause price flares, particularly for the platinum group metals, since a huge, huge chunk of them come from South Africa. If a full implosion happens, you would see, at least for like the very short term surges, you would see something like palladium, the more expensive of the two, would go to something like, I don't know, eight, maybe $10,000 an ounce. Platinum would be lower, but would still probably go up like over six. For a comparison, the highest platinum's ever gone was like close to two, and currently it's been hanging out around one. Highest palladium's ever gone was around three, and currently it's hanging out around 1,500. So you'll see that kind of stuff if South Africa does have a full grid failure and goes into a full internal collapse. Let's see, who else do we got? Okay, some more population stuff. So, oh wait, I promised I'd pay attention to chat. Never mind, chat is dead. Wait, I wasn't just misreading, right? Okay, okay, I am right. Chad is dead. Chad, let me know if you're still alive. So Persian Gulf, the rich Persian Gulf states, that is, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and the UAE, their populations are going to be heading downwards, or at least they're going to be starting to do so over the remainder of this decade as they send people home. And to see what I'm talking about, we will show you, for example, the UAE. You see this? That is dangerous. That is their imported labor that they essentially treat like slaves, for anyone who's familiar with the place. That's a bunch of Pakistanis and Bangladeshis and some Sri Lankans that the Persian Gulf nations, UAE included, essentially treat like slave labor. They literally have like essentially concentration camps outside of places like Dubai, that everyone just like ignores because they just want to play around in the rich playground. Don't pay attention to the concentration camp out there where all the $10 a day Bangladeshi slave laborers work, or live rather. They work on like construction and stuff. So they are starting, at least the smarter nations, Kuwait and Qatar mainly, are starting to send these workforces home. They're starting to dismiss them because they realize how dangerous actually having something like this is. Like millions of working age males far from their home, who you already treat like dirt, and the only reason they're putting up with it is because they earn some money that they get to send home to their families, and with periods of chaos likely coming soon upon the world, especially in some of the regions that they are from, when like the line gets cut, they are not going to be very happy. So uh, the Gulf states are starting to dismiss them and send them back. Uh, the ones that are doing so in larger numbers are the smarter ones, namely Kuwait and Qatar. So their populations are going to be contracting as they send those massive foreign workforces home. And for Kuwait and Qatar, at least, it doesn't matter so much to them because they've already built everything they want. They have all the infrastructure and things that they need. Whereas for Dubai and the UAE as a whole, rather, they kind of have they've idiotically based their entire economy around just constantly building more like rich people, shiny mega skyscrapers and nonsense like that. So they're kind of in a predicament. But Qatar, you can see it start slowing down, and now it's just about leveling off, and it's going to start turning down because they're going to start dismissing them. All right, what else was there? Brazil, in terms of their oil production. Brazil, by the end of this year, because of all the stuff they're adding up, is going to be up around 3.7, 3.8. By the end of next year, around 4 or a bit above 4. And based on stuff that is in waiting and additional stuff likely to be discovered still offshore, they are likely by the end of this decade to be curving off somewhere between 4.5 and 5 million barrels per day, which is definitely more than people initially thought they would have. Give me 1 second. My cat is being very ill behaved. I need to convince her to behave for a second. Okay, sorry about that. I'm back. All right, who else do we have here? Oh yeah, stuff with natural gas. So Algeria, as you may already know, was previously outputting about 8 billion cubic feet per day. Then, once the Russia stuff started and Europe needed substitutes, Algeria was able to immediately turn it up to 10 because they've never been pumping at their full capacity because Russia always just undercut them. And now, over the course of this year, via additional wells and connections to the pipe system, they will be going up to about 12. And by the end of next year, start of 2025, they should be able to be a bit above 14. And then from there onwards, because of additional discoveries that they've already made, ones likely still to be made because a huge chunk of Algeria, especially this basin down here, is basically untouched. And then also they have a whole bunch of shale that they've only just started working with. They will be cranking it up pretty far. And by by like the end of this decade, they should be somewhere between 16 and 20 billion cubic feet per day of gas production. Their oil production will keep going down because their oil is done, but their gas production they still have a lot. Qatar over the course of next year and into 2025, we'll be dialing theirs up from 19 up to 23 billion cubic feet per day because of additional capacity additions. And around 2027, they'll be jumping up to 27. And over the course of the remainder of the decade, they will be able to edge that up to around 28 to 29 billion cubic feet per day. And they'll be able to maintain that for quite a number of decades because of the sheer scale of the Pars gas field, which effectively is this whole area, this huge area, the size of Qatar itself, in between Qatar and Iran under the Persian Gulf. The Pars gas field is like the most enormous thing we've ever seen. Like you're used to hearing measurements in trillion cubic feet for how much gas is in a field. Well, the Pars gas field, uh, still, as of this moment, has over 1.1 quadrillion cubic feet. And Chad is still dead. No one has confirmed that it's not dead. And everything else on here is kind of minor. So I'm thinking, because my throat's getting tired, I might call it here. Unless I see anything else important or specific that I had here. I don't think so, or at least it doesn't look like it. So yeah, I'm probably gonna go ahead and call it here. So I also do want to eat eventually. And Bindi kind of wants attention, which is why she was misbehaving. That's usually what it means when she starts to misbehave. Oh, now Josh comes to confirm. Apparently everybody left about like, what would that be, half an hour ago? What was I talking about half an hour ago? That like everybody would leave over. Uh, what was it half an hour ago? I don't remember. I don't remember what we were on half an hour ago, but apparently it made everybody leave. But yeah, that's going to be it for this one. Thanks everybody who showed up, and I will see you all around next time.